Hey, hi everyone. Thank you for joining us on another edition of Table Talk. For those of you coming in for the first time, this is a series of conversations that I'm building, which is about food, but it's not a recipe show. It's about things that are adjacent to food, things that affect food, and how food affects the rest of our lives. And thanks to a group that I started last year during lockdown, it's where I started thinking and hearing about how much food intersects our lives and affects our lives in so many different ways. And that was the inspiration for starting the show. And let's see how it goes there. My guest today is an old friend from my advertising days, Vikram Doctor. We started our advertising careers together as trainees in Lintas. And at different times, both of us moved to journalism later on. And we've kept in touch over the years. And Doc has become this cult columnist and authority on food. Uh, and I'm so happy that he's able to join us here. Hi, Doc.
I'm rejoining you. Please, I was on your show like about like what 2 months back, 3 months back.
Yes.
Okay.
So yeah, Doc is back on the show, as I should have
Well,
said.
I want to thank you because actually, the idea for today's topic actually came from me, and you were kind enough to agree to do it. I mean, simply because this is the Gandhi Jayanti weekend, and it seemed to me appropriate to do a show on Gandhi and food, which is a subject I'm really interested in. But I realize many people are not. In fact, whenever I start talking about Gandhi and food, people like sort of look at me blank and say, "Oh, but wasn't he always fasting?" or didn't he have really freaky food habits, which is also true, but I mean it doesn't capture the whole thing, and capture the range and the interest that there is in food. So yes, I do have to find myself often justifying. The other thing, Peter, is that we have become sort of oversaturated and at the same time unfamiliar with Gandhi. We in a way, I sometimes feel this is the real triumph of the people who hate Gandhi, of course, who are largely many people are in powerful positions now, by making Gandhi ubiquitous and by feeding us just the most standardized hagiography of Gandhi. We lose all sight of why Gandhi was really interested. Was really interesting, and people just turn off. I mean, Gandhi is the sort of image you see all the time, and people just no longer really engage with Gandhi. um, and I will admit that I was like that too. And I have one person to thank really, and that's Ram Guha. Because Ram, many years back, Ram, I think, was starting research on his monumental Gandhi biography. And he knew I wrote a lot about food. And he told me one day that, since you're so interested in food, why don't you start reading about Gandhi and food? And I had the same reaction as I guess most people do. But he said, no, go and read it. And I was like, where would I read it? He said, well, the collected works are there. The complete collected works of Mahatma Gandhi, which add up to 100 volumes in all if you add the editions and the indices and things like that. And he also told me the very key thing. He says that it's all available online. You can just sit at your computer and read it. So very skeptically, I started doing it. I opened it. It was then and still is actually on a website called Gandhi Serve, which is hosted in Germany. And I started reading it and I got fascinated. And, I have to say that I realized that the collected works of Mahatma Gandhi are actually an incredible resource. It's one of the great, I would say, even literary documents ever produced in India. And before we actually started talking about food, I do want to spend a little time talking about the collected works and why it's such an incredible resource. And I'm really happy to see that among the guests today we have Carl Malamud, who I know about through you because he's a friend of yours who you interviewed and who has also done a significant amount of work in putting Gandhi's collected works, making them accessible. Do you want to tell us a little bit about him before I talk and maybe get him in the conversation too?
Yeah. So Carl, I met because he was wandering around India at that point, uh, you know, stirring up rebellion of various kinds, talking in colleges and whatnot. And he told me about how he and a few others were taking the Indian government to court about standards. Uh, Carl's posted the link there for those of you one thing, which is the Hind Swaraj collection, which is his backup of a whole bunch of stuff that is around the freedom movement. But Karl was taking the Indian government to court about Indian standards on the grounds that standards should be free, being de facto law. You shouldn't have to pay for standards to know how you can make a child's toy or wire a building or whatever it is. You have to comply. And then you have to pay just to learn how you have to comply. And his stance is that standards bodies can make their money by, for instance, certification. They don't need to sell the standards. Like the building code costs you 14 grand, and for a young student, that's a lot. So that was my introduction to Karl's work. And while he was in India, he started messing around with looking at Indian archives of various kind and downloaded stuff and put it all up on the Internet Archive. And he's got the complete works of Gandhi. He's got Nehru, he's got Ambedkar. He's got a collection of photographs, which you probably won't be able to find on other stuff. He's got Gandhi's speeches on, All India Radio, prayer meetings, and a bunch of stuff like that. And his methods are what he calls Code Swaraj, where the whole thing is you take off from Gandhi, you tell your rulers what you want, you give them the chance to respond, and then civil disobedience, right? And he's done that at various places. So when the Bureau of Indian Standards, he subscribed, he bought the Indian standards, put them up online. When it came to time for to renewing his subscription, he wrote back to them saying, I would like to renew. And by the way, here's a archive of your stuff out there. And the Bureau of Indian Standards said, what the fuck, take it down.
Right.
And
because there is some evidence that Gandhi never really wanted his works to go into copyright at all. The only reason he agreed to put his works in copyright was he wanted to raise money for the Navjeevan Press, which publishes his work and puts it in into public domain very cheaply. And actually, when the copyright was about to expire, Navjeevan have absolutely no problems with it. They were like, let it all be free, which is great. Okay, I just want to, but why the collected works are so amazing? The Collected Works project started in 1956. Okay, we are going to talk about food soon, but there is context to this. The Indian government in 1956 set up a committee headed by K. Swaminathan to put together the Collected Works of Mahatma Gandhi. And I thought maybe I'm sure some people, people thought we'd put together his writings and speeches and things like that. One full credit has to be given to Swaminathan and the committee is they put together everything, every scrap of paper, letter, random note that was available. They put it together, and there was a lot because from the South African days onwards, Gandhi was a compulsive writer. He wrote letters to everybody. He wrote articles. Many of his speeches were written. Later on, once he got Mahadev Desai as his secretary, Mahadev spent an incredible amount of time just recording Gandhi's speeches and what Gandhi was doing on a daily basis. That also becomes part of the Collected Works. And what I love about the Collected Works is that, honestly, even the personal stuff is there. What it was really ridiculous is that every few years, somebody comes out with a book about, oh my God, Gandhi's scandalous history with women, Gandhi's scandalous, thing like that. And, this is ridiculous because it's all there in the Collected Works. Very rarely new documents, come up, and there is a plan for a revised Collected Works to come up at some point. But actually, most of the material that's claimed to be so scandalous is there in the Collected Works because Swaminathan and his team decided just to put it all. The only changes that they did was in a few cases, they put the names of people like Nina Cram Cook, for instance, an American woman who Gandhi had an obsession with. Briefly, they just put her as N. So the other people's names sometimes are just given as initials, but the material is there. It's all there, and so it is really ridiculous how often people treat this as some scary, the unknown Gandhi, to quote like one of the books. It's not unknown. It's all been there in the Collected Works since the 60s. And also, what is amazing is that very ordinary letters are there. So you can, and it's all presented chronologically. So you could have Gandhi writing, say, Hind Swaraj, or you could have him writing a letter to the Viceroy, and the very next letter will be some random letter to somebody in his ashram. And you get what is wonderful about reading it chronologically, which is what I ended up doing. The Economic Times never realized this. They thought I was sitting and working on my computer. I was actually spent about 3 years off and on reading my work through the completed Collected Works, sitting at my computer in the Times office. so you can have him writing to the viceroy in one letter, and then some random ashram person, and he got involved in all these insane, stupid, petty disputes. What you get from the collected works is a real sense of a life lived and of an evolution of Gandhi's evolution as a person. And that is incredible because it's also history being made. In the course of this man's life, you can see the Indian national movement unfolding in all the disputes and the pettiness and things like that. I mean, I will say that it helped me a lot. I mean, partly because it deepened my interest in food in many ways, which we'll come to. But also, in the years when I was reading it was also some pretty dicey years for the 377 case, which we were fighting for the decriminalization of homosexuality. And like all activist movements, it was a very plagued, and we have a lot of difficult people. Activists are difficult people. It's what makes them activists. And we had lots of complicated issues to deal with, lots of egos to deal with. And while I'm not saying that in a sense, I think personally I learned a bit in reading my way through how Gandhi negotiated his way through all these things. And so I recommend it to anybody. If you ever have any want to just like dip in, you can dip in at any time. I mean, the Gandhi Serve website allowed you to do a search across the whole collected works. For some reason that no longer works, but maybe Carl's website does allow you to do a search across the whole collected works. Otherwise, you can just open any one of the volumes online and do a search within them. As I said, they are extraordinary. So my interest in Gandhi and food came from the collected works, and I realized what Ram had realized too. There is so much about food, because in a sense, Gandhi's political activism starts with food. When Gandhi went to London.
Look, just take a second here, since we just talked about the activism phase and the connection there and the legal fight. I want you to just spend a few minutes just telling us why you chose All Creatures Great and Small as your charity.
Okay. That links to the 377 case, because Anjali Gopalan, who's this incredible woman who runs All Creatures Great and Small, ran NAZ India, which actually filed what finally became one of the main 377 case. And she's an amazing woman. She also does, and she's one of these people who manages to do multiple amazing things and somehow makes them all work. So, she got involved in HIV/AIDS, and when in the real crisis years in India, she started one of the first orphanages for kids whose parents had died of AIDS. And the kids were also HIV positive, and nobody else wanted to take them. So she started an orphanage for them. Luckily, this is no longer the case, because now you have medicines that prevent mother to child transmission of HIV. So, that is one area of activism that's wound up. But what is amazing is, she has supported these kids right through their lives. And, many of them have got married and have jobs and are leading completely normal lives. Some of them have actually become interested in her other areas. So they actually work with her in All Creatures Great and Small, which is an animal rescue center on the outskirts of Gurgaon, which is incredible because she takes in every kind of animal, and she takes in them in no questions asked, and just takes care of them. And she just manages to get everything to work. Like, for instance, she got Keshav Suri, who was one of the main plaintiffs in the 377 case, and he runs the Lalit Hotels. She got him to get the Lalit Hotels to give all their food waste to All Creatures Great and Small, and that's sort of cooked up and given as animal food. So I love it. She's one of these people who's both dedicated and practical, and non-political. I mean, not political. She doesn't get her ego into it. She is just amazing. All Creatures Great and Small is an incredible resource. So if anybody ever wants to give to animal rights in India, All Creatures Great and Small is the place to give.
Okay, the reason why I brought that up is, those of you who have come and know, this series is free to attend for anyone. And if at some stage a sponsor comes in, great, at that point I'll make some money, but I'm not charging I don't intend to charge anyone to attend. Sure. If a sponsor comes in, I hope to be able to pay my guests, but that's about it really. And what we do ask is, we ask all our guests to name a charity, and we ask people who attended to, as a gesture of thanks, to, if you can afford it, make a donation. I'm putting links here to All Creatures Great and Small's own website and their support page. And they also have a fundraiser running on Milab. And you can contribute whatever you want to there. This is not mandatory. It's not a ticket. It's up to you. But please, if you like what you listened to today, please say thank you to Doc by making a small donation there. And it's on trust. You don't have to send me a receipt. You don't have to send Doc a receipt, right? So let's get back to Gandhi. And
Gandhi and food. So yeah,
you were telling me that he was not a particularly political person before he hit the UK.
He was just a young, Gujarati guy who was really excited to be in London, to be at like what he thought the center of the world at that time. And he didn't have much money, but he within his means he tried to dress like fashionably in the British style, and he went to theaters and things like that. But he had one big problem. He was really, really hungry because he had promised his mother that he would not eat meat, and he was very stubborn about this because on the voyage to London, everybody told him you're going to have to start eating meat at some point, and something in Gandhi actually really became really stubborn, and I said, no, I'm not going to eat meat. So on the ship he managed, there was bread and butter. I mean, I think in his first few years on the ship and in England he ate a lot of bread and butter, and he managed. I mean, in the ships, you could actually, the other way vegetarians managed on the ships is they got friendly with all the Indian sailors who were cooking for themselves, and so they would be able to get dal chawal from the sailors. So that's the other typical way Indian vegetarians managed on ships. So Gandhi lands up in London and he goes in these lodgings and he meets these landladies who do their best, but they really find it very hard feeding him, and he has a pretty miserable time until somebody finally tells him that there are these vegetarian restaurants, just one or two, and he goes in search of them, and he finds the vegetarian restaurant, and his life really changes because for the first time he can have sort of semi decent food in London. There were just one or two vegetarian restaurants. And this is a small detail, but one of the really early and very nice biographies of Gandhi was written by a British writer called Geoffrey Ashe, who made a wonderful connection. He notes that the vegetarian restaurant that Gandhi went to is also mentioned in one of the Sherlock Holmes stories. And he has this little wonderful moment of imagining of Sherlock Holmes and Gandhi meeting over a vegetarian meal at the restaurant, which I love. I love the idea. So Gandhi...
Which restaurant it was?
Huh?
You remember which restaurant it was?
I forgot the name. I mean, there were two. One was called the Pudding Bowl, and the other, I think, was just called the Vegetarian Restaurant. Or maybe it was the London Vegetarian Society's restaurant. So in these restaurants, he finds food, and he also finds a whole subculture which fascinates him. And the thing is, in the late 19th century and early 20th century, vegetarianism attracted a very wide and pretty random range of people, all sort of anti-establishment in various ways, because the whole establishment is all about meat and beef and things like that. So if you were not eating that, you had to be sort of quirky and anti-establishment. So you get, feminists, people who believe in women's suffrage, people, who believe in animal rights, the whole anti-vivisectionists. You have people who believe in blowing everything up, anarchists, and people who, all sorts of random people, activists, cranks. I mean, one of the early London restaurants, which I think still exists, is called Cranks, simply because so many random people so many people, the reputation was of getting cranky people. So Gandhi sort of finds himself with this thing, and while he's eating his meal, since he's a bit timid, he picks up some of the pamphlets that are hanging around the restaurant. And these pamphlets are talking about political issues, especially anti-imperialism, which was again something that got together that a lot of people who were vegetarians were interested in. And bit by bit, he starts going to, there is a London Vegetarian Society. He finds a leaflet for one of their activities and he starts going to the meetings. And he gets more and more interested. And they are also, they're not the typical fully racist like Brits. They're also encouraging. So the first time he starts making friends outside the Indian student circle. And he becomes fascinated. And there are lots of stories about how he starts talking. His first public speeches, because he's not a confident public speaker, happens at the Vegetarian Society. He's asked to give talks on what Indian vegetarianism in India and Indian food. So, he starts talking about that. He starts taking part in political debates. and it is his awakening to a wider world beyond like just the world of being a student in London. And this is really critical for him. So there are two influences in London which are important. One is the London Vegetarian Society. And throughout his life, Gandhi is very grateful to them. And when he goes back to England for the last time for the Roundtable Conference, uh, which was a complete failure from Gandhi's point of view, he did spend some time to have a special, yes, thanks. Carl has remembered it's called the Central Restaurant. He has a special meeting of the Vegetarian Society, and he's welcome back. I mean, he's their most famous member, and it's like a very triumphal moment, one of the few very triumphal moments he has in that visit, last visit to London. Um, the other interesting person who has a big influence on him in London is a fairly obscure now Gujarati writer called Narayan Hemchandra. Narayan Hemchandra seems to have pretty much vanished from history books. Not very much is known about him beyond what is written by Gandhi. But he was important enough for Gandhi to devote a whole chapter in My Experiments with Truth. He was a very quirky, very independent-minded Gujarati writer who basically set out to see the world, but did not feel any need to change himself, for the purposes of the world. So he lands up in the UK wearing Indian clothes, which at that time was unheard of. Many years later, I mean, Gandhi notes that after in the UK, he went to the US, and there apparently was arrested for being indecently dressed because he was wearing a dhoti, And so Gandhi, who's full British gentleman at this time, is both fascinated and by the way Narayan Hemchandra walks through London streets wearing Indian clothes, even though people give him all sorts of strange looks. And uh, you know this year marks the centenary of Gandhi's decision to start wearing a loincloth and give up even the Gujarati clothes he was wearing earlier. And the seed of that is clearly born in his meeting with Narayan Hemchandra. The other thing Hemchandra does is Gandhi, obviously Hemchandra is a vegetarian, and Gandhi sort of decides to, he'll cook vegetarian food for him. He makes he writes, he makes carrot soup for Hemchandra because Gandhi is as proud of, his exposure now to food is Western food. And Narayan Hemchandra says, what is this nonsense? I want dal. So he makes Gandhi like hunt through London until they find moong dal. And he cooks moong dal. And Gandhi actually writes he really relished it because, he realized at some point that the sort of British vegetarian food he was eating was not really as tasty as his Indian food. So Narayan Hemchandra actually becomes a really important influence on Gandhi, both in dress and in food, and basically in the idea that you don't have to follow the Western way of living just because you're interacting with Westerners. But it takes some time before Gandhi makes these changes for himself. Okay, so after London come his South African years. And the same thing happens in South Africa. When he goes to South Africa, he again has to look for like vegetarian food, which is even harder to find in South Africa. Even today, being a vegetarian in South Africa is hardly easy. And when he's in Johannesburg, there is just one vegetarian restaurant. It's called Ziegler. It's started by a guy called Adolf Ziegler, a German. And again, this sort of eccentric sort of group of people frequented. So Gandhi starts going to Ziegler's vegetarian restaurant. He even invests in Ziegler's vegetarian restaurant and loses his money, following which he actually puts £1,000 into another vegetarian restaurant started by a lady called Ada Bissix. And that at some point also goes under, leaving Gandhi under really financial strains. And I wrote a piece today saying that anybody who's ever lost money in restaurants, and many people have lost money in restaurants, you might feel better knowing that Gandhi also lost a hell of a lot of money investing in restaurants.
I was reading that piece today just before we started, and it's like, okay, Gandhi was also in the restaurant business at one time, and I don't think anyone has ever said that to me. No, they knew that.
Yeah. But what he lost monetarily in the restaurants, and he lost a lot, was he actually made up in making really important contacts, because he met a bunch of people who became his first non-Indian contacts in South Africa, and some of them would become his first real associates. So he meets people like Albert Best, Henry Pollock, and not so much at Ziegler's restaurant, but in a similar sort of context, he meets Herman Kallenbach, who really becomes his first disciple. And these men become his supporters. They become sort of bridges to the European community. They become advisors, and they make it, they help Gandhi realize that he is leading a movement now, not just he's not just a Banya lawyer. Um, and Kallenbach in particular, who Gandhi helped convince to become a vegetarian, becomes his really close associate and helps him start Phoenix Farm, where Gandhi starts living with his family and a bunch of other people. And that's where a lot of his food experience happens. And when you read through, there are meticulous records of all his food, all his food experimentation. And when you read it, you realize how many of what we think are current, trendy diets, Gandhi was experimenting with them earlier. So a raw food diet, Gandhi for several weeks tried what he called a vital foods diet, which is essentially a raw foods diet. Gluten-free diet, one of the main, Gandhi kept trying to experiment with different types of ingredients. So one of the ingredients that he tried experimenting with was banana flour, green banana flour, which is gluten-free. And again, today, green banana flour is something that's being used for gluten-free restaurants for people on keto diets and things like that. I think keto diets, but definitely for gluten-free things. So Gandhi at Phoenix starts making banana chapatis, and so he many of these things he experiments with over there. I want to say over here one thing that I learned of all this by myself pretty much, but today there is a book which actually talks about a lot of these things. I'm going to show it to you. This is Nico Slate. Can't see it properly. Gandhi Search. It's Gandhi Search for the Perfect Diet: Eating with the World in Mind. Slate is an academic, an excellent academic, and it's an interesting book. He takes a slightly more of an academic approach than I might, but he covers a lot of the issues. And if anybody wants to follow on from this talk when reading more about Gandhi and food, Nico Slate is a place to start. So Nico Slate talks about some of these things. But Gandhi in South Africa, other things happen. And one of the purposes of my piece today is that we know so little about the Gandhi in South Africa. We just know that one story of how he's kicked out of a train in Pietermaritzburg and all that. But the South African years were long and very critical for Gandhi in many ways. For one thing, for instance, he is dealing with different communities. He is dealing with South Indians, with Tamil and Telugu speaking workers who are working in the cane fields. He's dealing with the Muslim and the Hindu Gujarati traders. He's dealing with Pathans, some of whom actually attack him very badly at one point. So he's really dealing with people from across India, which is very critical when he comes back to India, and that gives him the first sense of he is a truly pan-Indian leader, whereas most of the other nationalist leaders in India at that time were sort of, Tilak was in West India, there were the Bengalis, there were the Tamilians, very, very few people had the pan-Indian appeal. Gandhi, because of his experience in South Africa, comes in as a pan-Indian leader. So that's very critical. More than that, he's also learning the nuts and bolts of running a movement, of being an activist. So, for instance, we all know him for the Dandi March, but many people don't know that he took out a march in South Africa from Durban to the Transvaal, which at that time was this province within South Africa, which didn't allow Asians to stay there, or they had to apply for permits and only were able to stay on very restricted terms. So he actually starts a march to the Transvaal to break the law. And clearly, many years later, when he marches to Dundee, this first march in South Africa is a model in his mind. But also, and if anybody wants to read this, the book to read is his sort of companion volume to my experiments with truth, which is called Satyagraha in South Africa. Again, a very readable. Gandhi was a very readable writer. He strove naturally. He wrote in very simple language, especially when it's translated, and it's very readable. Satyagraha in South Africa talks about the nuts and bolts of organizing a march, which is not easy. I mean, for instance, people have to be fed, and you see him, organizing these issues about how to feed people, how to get Indian merchants along the way to contribute food, and that also makes them part of the movement. All tactics that you would see him use later on in India. And later on, he gets imprisoned for the first time, and he goes to jail. And this actually starts something else new, because again, Gandhi is now dealing with the experience of jail for the first time, and also the experience of prison food. And at that time, the South African jail was racially segregated like everything else. There was a diet for white people, there was a diet for black people, colored people were assumed to be part of that. And Gandhi says that and the diet involves meat. So Gandhi says this is not good enough. We need to have a separate diet. We need to have a diet that's more suitable for us. And he starts fighting, arguing, reasoning with the prison authorities, and always holding the threat that he may not eat and then die. And for the prison authorities really get scared about this because they suddenly realize that they are responsible for the lives of prisoners, and you have very few rights in prison, but you can not eat. I mean, and throughout history, hunger strikes have been one of the few tools left to prisoners. Gandhi possibly was inspired by the first politician who died on a hunger strike, an Irish politician whose name I can't remember at this moment. He was the mayor of Cork who died on a hunger strike around the same time. And that actually, I think, across the world spread the history that hunger strikes can be a tool of protest. So actually, it works with Gandhi. I mean, he gets the prison authorities to give him the sort of diet that he's asking for, and other Indian prisoners too. So, for all these reasons, the South African years are very critical. And it sets the tone for when he comes back to India, right? Now, when he comes back to India, several things happen. One is, for the first time, he travels across India. And we see, if anybody remembers the Attenborough film, you do see him traveling across India, and it's very critical because A, he realizes the challenges he has to face. B, and this is there in the collected works, he realizes the reality of hunger in India, and this again is something that has become a lot of interest to me, partly from reading the collected works. I mean, it's a difficult issue that you can be a food writer in India, you can write about food, you can write about different types of food. But at some point, I feel it's important to acknowledge at least the issue that the reality of food in India is actually hunger for so many people still. This does not invalidate food writing of other kinds. You can still write about food in expensive restaurants. You can still write about. I think I'm not saying this in any way. Yes, Terence McSweeney. Thanks so much. He was the Irish prisoner who died in 1920 from the first hunger strike. So, when I say that we have to remember the importance of hunger, I'm not saying this in any moralizing way. It means that you can write about food in other ways. But I feel that people should remember that the reality of food in India is actually the lack of it. And Gandhi understands this in his first years. And this is a very important realization for him. And it doesn't really change his diet. He continues eating, what he does and experimenting with his food. Because one thing Gandhi's vegetarianism and Gandhi's attitude with food was actually quite different from the sort of Vaishnav. He grew up in a Vaishnav family. So from the sort of Vaishnav attitude to vegetarianism, Gandhi's vegetarianism was actually a much more Western oriented one. That was what he retained from his days with the Vegetarian Society. So the people he looked to, for advice were people like the Kellogg's. Yes, the same Kellogg's of your Kellogg's cornflakes. Now, if you've ever seen a movie called The Road to Wellville, have you seen this film? Okay, it's a very entertaining film about the Kellogg's and the whole growth in the nutrition and diet industry at the end of the 19th century, the early 20th century. And the place a lot of this happened was this one spa town in the US called Battle Creek. And Battle Creek was where this American doctor called J.H. Kellogg set up his first clinic to deal with people who had, body problems by treating them through diet and spa therapy. And he also invented products. So among the products that he invented was cornflakes. And I mean, this is where Kellogg gets very complicated because it gets all his ideas of nutrition, and Gandhi picks this up from Kellogg, are also linked with ideas of sexuality, the problems of sexuality. So many people don't realize that cornflakes was invented as a food to sort of dampen your sexual appetite. It was, it was partly invented to stop people masturbating.
Yes, forget about that.
Yeah, just think about that when you have your cornflakes in the morning. But by chance, I mean, Kellogg also invented this multi-million business of breakfast foods. But at the same time, he continued writing these long, big volumes on food and nutrition, and Gandhi followed them like a lot. I mean, he as soon as they came out in the US, he got copies, and Kellogg was one of Gandhi's like gurus when it came to food. Louis Kuhn was another one, a German, I think, origin a nutritionist. So Gandhi is balancing all these things. He's trying to look at the issues of the really poor in India, but the other times he's trying to deal with all his own issues of health and nutrition. And as soon as he comes back to India, he's faced with a very interesting food dilemma, which has to do with milk. Now, Gandhi was very aware of the cruelties involved in milk production. And the reality is that milk involves some very fundamental cruelties. At the very start, for a cow to produce milk, you have to take the calf away. And if you are doing it ethically, the calf is allowed some milk, but many calves are killed or just starved or starved to death. Also, cows then have to give milk, and at the end, at the end of their milking years, many of them are just killed because that's the economics of dairy. Dairy farmers need to kill and sell their cows for meat in order to be able to afford new cows to use for dairy. So there are fundamental cruelties involved with dairy. And Gandhi was aware of some of these issues, and he was also, mostly it was the idea of stealing milk from the calf that he was very uncomfortable with. And periodically, starting in South Africa, he experimented with giving up milk. But this was a real problem for him because he didn't have very many other sources of protein. He ate nuts, and actually one of the foods that actually sustained Gandhi the most throughout his life is actually peanut butter. He ate a lot of ground peanuts, meaning essentially peanut butter. But otherwise, he didn't really like dals. He would eat moong dal sometime, but the fact that dal gives gas was very troubling to him, and he just didn't seem to like dals very much. And many of the sort of high protein foods we have today, like soya, which just did not exist at that time. So soya was barely known outside the Chinese and Far Eastern world. Later on in Gandhi's life, he gets interested in soya to some extent, but the soya products that are available at that time are far too crude and not good enough to really be important for him. So he really needs protein. And milk, dairy protein was one of the few sources of protein that he has. Now, it all comes to a head when he comes back to India because he learns of a practice called fuka, which appalls him. Now, do you have any idea what fuka is? Fuka is a practice which is done actually in dairying across the world. The English term for it is cow blowing. Basically, it is stimulating a cow's vagina by blowing air into it. By stimulating the vagina, you stimulate the hormones that lead to the production of milk. Okay, and one way to do it is by physically blowing air into the vagina. The practice is called cow blowing. In India, the term is fuka, and it's a very standard process. When a cow starts giving today we just inject them with hormones and they keep like producing milk, which is again a problem. But Gandhi learns of fuka and he is appalled. I mean, there is the abuse of the cow. B, the fact that it's sort of sexual abuse of a cow that involves the sexual organs appalls him even more. He's completely disgusted. And I mean, it is an abusive process. I mean, the whole process of dairying is abusive. The fact that many of us still drink milk shouldn't close our eyes to the fact that dairying is an abusive process. And yes, in the case of cow blowing fuka, it is a sexually abusive process. So Gandhi takes a vow on the spot that I will not drink any more milk. Immediately, his health suffers. And this is when he's first back in India. He's starting to get involved in nationalism. He can see his future ahead of him as you know, a nationalist leader, and he knows he has great things to do, but his health starts suffering. And normally he would drink milk, but now he's taken a vow, and he takes vows seriously. So he goes to see a doctor, and the doctor was like, listen, you have to have some protein. I mean, you have to have some, and if you're not eating anything else, you have to have milk. And Gandhi was like, no, but I've taken a vow. Actually, the person who solves the problem here, but to some extent, is Kasturba, because she's sitting with him in the doctor's office. And she says, well, how about buffalo's milk? And he was like, no, cows, buffaloes, you know. I mean, Gandhi does see a big difference between cows and buffaloes in other contexts, but in this context, he was like, no, you know, that's not really a thing. So then she says, well, what about goats? And Gandhi thinks about it. And remember, he's a lawyer, okay, because this is a very sort of legal splitting hairs definition, which he is aware of. He knows that he's being very legalistic here. He thinks, well, yes, you know, when I made the vow, I was not thinking about goats. So maybe I can have goat's milk, okay? He is well aware of the wonderful thing you know about the collected works is you realize how self-aware Gandhi was. So he is well aware that he's being hypocritical here. He's well aware that this is legal hair splitting between, you know, cows and buffaloes on one side, goats on the other side. But, you know, he's also practical. He wants to live. He wants to work for nationalism. He doesn't want to like starve himself to death. So he says, fine, I'll have goat's milk. And this starts the whole process of goats in Gandhi's life. And I have to say that, I mean, this doesn't really come up in the collected works much, but you have to read the works of some of his associates, which I have, and you realize how much the damn goats became an issue in Gandhi's life. The person who writes about the goats with vividly, and I think a certain amount of bitterness, is actually Mirabai, Madeline Slade, who became his associates and for a long time his chief goat wrangler. Because wherever Gandhi went, now these goats had to be prepared. And, you know, so whether it was like, I mean, it wasn't that difficult when he was traveling across India because you could find lactating goats in most places. It's a huge problem when he goes abroad, especially for the Roundtable Conference, because there have to be goats who are lactating, and goats don't actually give that much milk. I mean, there have to be goats on the ship. When he reaches Paris, I mean, by ship, there is a goat waiting for him over there. And another story, not from Miraben, but actually comes from Reginald Reynolds, who was this really wonderful Quaker activist. I mean, Reginald Reynolds, the one reason people might know him is because when Gandhi decides to launch, he's a young British Quaker activist who comes to work with Gandhi in his ashram. He's a pacifist. And when Gandhi decides to launch the Dandi March, he wants to give the Viceroy, Lord Irwin, he wants to give he wants to give the Viceroy advance notice that he's going on this march, he's going to break the law, and he thinks to do it symbolically, he will send it with a young British person. So Reginald Reynolds is chosen as the person to go and give the message to the Viceroy that Gandhi is going to break the law. So he really goes and he gives it. I mean, Reginald Reynolds was a wonderful guy, a really fascinating character who wrote a couple of really good books. My Life in Crimes is one of them, and to live in the world, which is about his interactions with Gandhi. So I think, and this anecdote comes from To Live in the World. So when Gandhi goes to London for the Roundtable Conference, as I said, the Roundtable Conference is a waste for Gandhi's point. He meets many other people. At one point, he goes to Oxford to meet all the dons at Oxford, and there are no goats. And so suddenly there is this clear panic about goats, and Gandhi is being shadowed by policemen. So suddenly all the policemen are sent running around the countryside looking for lactating goats for Gandhi. So as I said, in the parallel to the whole nationalist movement and Gandhi's struggle is the struggle about the goats. I mean, so, you know, I really feel that the goats deserve some level of acknowledgement for Gandhi's accomplishments. And as I said, it comes from this very, you know, legalistic thing about cows and buffaloes on one hand, goats on the other. Were you aware of this goats view of Indian history?
Well, after I did know that Gandhi, was into goat's milk, but I hadn't thought about how difficult the logistics would be.
Yeah, and as I said, I mean, the Spirit's Journey, which is Madeline said, Miraben's book, has a lot of very sort of deeply felt passages about goats and the problems of trying to get goats for Gandhi wherever he went. Somewhere I feel there should be a statue in honor of all the goats that that supported Mahatma Gandhi. Okay, so I think we got a bit out of track. Where are we now?
Where he decided that goat's milk would be part of his diet since, and the legal hair splitting
Yeah.
about that.
So, and as I said, what I found fascinating as I read my way through the thing is how often food comes up in unexpected places, especially in the early years. When Gandhi is sort of meeting people. So again, another person who most people don't associate with food is Vallabhbhai Patel. But Vallabhbhai Patel, actually, Sardar Patel, comes to Gandhi's attention through another food, through onions, actually. Um, and again, Gandhi's attitude towards onions was actually very interesting because he comes from this sort of Vaishnav background, which sees onions and garlic as sort of, heaty food and like not, and sort of wrong. And while Gandhi was never a Jain, he was close to many Jains and influenced by Jain thinking. So again, onions were avoided. But then he goes to the UK, where one of the few things that gives English vegetarian food any flavor is garlic and onions. So he eats garlic and onions there. But he goes through periods in his life where he doesn't really eat onions and garlic until sometime in the 1930s or 1935 or so, when I think for reasons of blood pressure, he's advised to eat garlic, after which point he eats garlic all the time. I mean, many people who go to meet Gandhi, in unguarded moments, come away saying of how much there was a smell of garlic always, floating around him.
Interesting thing of Patel and the onions, right?
So Patel and Gandhi come together in around 1918, when Gandhi is trying out satyagraha. He's trying out satyagraha in different ways, civil disobedience in different ways in India. And one place where he tries it out is in Kheda, which is in southern Gujarat, where it's an area where there are lots of onion farmers. And this was in a year in which the onion crop had failed, and the farmers were facing real suffering. And the British, who depended on land tax as one of the chief sources of revenue, were insisting on collecting the land tax. And Gandhi sees an opportunity there, and he goes there and he starts saying that, reasoning with the authorities, saying like, this is wrong. Why, you can't ask farmers whose crops have failed for land tax. And he has a really interesting interaction actually with the district magistrate, whose name I cannot remember at the moment. But the interesting thing about this district magistrate is that this is again one of those random connections. His brother was Boris Karloff, who became Frankenstein. So he's talking to Frankenstein's brother over here. His name was not Bal, but his name is William Patterson or something like that. And the magistrate's name was Frank Patterson or something like that. So Gandhi organizes an onion satyagraha against the land tax. He gets the one of the onion farmers, I think his name was Mohanlal Pandya, to refuse to pay the land tax. He goes to jail. Gandhi dubs him the Onion King, and this is one of the first practical examples of organizing farmers for civil disobedience. And the key person who helps him do this is a young local activist called Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel, who we know as Sardar Patel. And through the Kheda Satyagraha, through the Onion Satyagraha, Patel becomes an associate of Gandhi. And when that Statue of Unity went up, I remember thinking, yes, it's onions that put him up there. As I said, looking at Gandhi through food gives you oddball perspectives on a lot of prominent people.
There's a story about the hamper which had onions in it, where people were not eating. The hamper of vegetables.
Sorry. This is another anecdote from Reginald Reynolds. Like, this happens many years later in the ashram. And we can talk about the ashram after this. Many people in the ashram were also sort of from the sort of Vaishnav sort of like background and were not comfortable with onions. And at some point at the ashram, a huge hamper of onions lands up. And most people are, oh my God, what are we going to do with these onions? Gandhi was not there at the ashram at this point. but Sardar Patel was there, and Reginald Reynolds was there, and Sardar Patel says, "Okay, fine, I'll eat the onions, and Reginald will join me." So he and Reginald go off in a corner and eat the onions. I mean, okay, this is a way, to touch on something else that I think a lot of people don't realize, but actually comes through very strongly. When you read the collected works chronologically, and in particular, if you read it from a food point of view, as I did. What many people don't realize is, there's been many books about Gandhi's dysfunctional family life, and it's true. He had a completely dysfunctional family life, particularly with the eldest son. But in a way, Gandhi compensated for this by creating, and in a way, this is a modern way of looking at this, a sort of family of his own in all the sort of people who surrounded him, who then would go up to become the members of the ashrams. So from Sabarmati onwards to Varda and all the other ashrams, there were all these people who just came and to Gandhi. Many of them were activists, but many of them were not. And there's no other way to say this. Many of them were slightly bonkers. I mean, because I guess this is true of anywhere in India. Any charismatic guru attracts a lot of fairly damaged, fairly oddball people. So a lot of the people who ended up surrounding Gandhi were this bunch of fairly oddball, cranky people who were all like, as with every guru, devotees, floating around him, fighting with each other, etc. And what you realize reading the collected works is that, again, in parallel with all of Gandhi's, involvement with the nationalist movement, with all his activism, there was also this ashram management going on. There is this constant stream of having to, settle petty disputes between ashram inmates, giving ashram people advice about what they should eat, what they shouldn't eat. There is this constant stream of ashram stuff that goes on, and it irritated some of Gandhi's other associates. And not Nehru, for instance, had no patience for them. He called them like Gandhi's lame ducks, and had zero patience for the ashram. And in fact, Nehru actually didn't really spend much time at the ashram. Partly, I think, because he just was so irritated by all these people who were and they were a drain on Gandhi's time. But at the same time, they were family. They were really his chosen family in some way, and they sustained him in other ways. And one of the ways that they sustained him was through giving advice on food. So that right through his life, there is this constant stream of advice that Gandhi is giving random people on food. Like, there's one of the people Gandhi writes to most is somebody who's almost unknown now. His name is Mathura Das Trikamji. I think he was a local politician in Bombay. And Gandhi gives him pretty much a diet plan for life. He's always talking to him about his food, what his weight is, what are your motions like, complete. And it's like in parallel with running India's independence campaign, he's also Mathura Das Trikamji's like personal dietitian. And there are a whole bunch of like people like this that Gandhi is giving advice to about food, and he actually enjoys this. He says it many times that this is my relaxation. I like doing this. I like advising people on how to adjust this, your diet, eat so much this, eat that, eat this, things like that, adjust your diet. And this is despite the fact that by his own admission, his own diet had all sorts of effects on him. I mean, like he lost all his teeth at one point, and so whether it was a good idea to have Gandhi as your personal dietitian, I think is a moot question. But it certainly gave Gandhi, he often says it was his relaxation from everything else. You can be doing all this like stuff about independence and nationalism, and then you focus on somebody's diet advice. And again, this is, and to me, this was a real insight into Gandhi about psychologically, however annoying the ashram people were, and they were clearly very, very, very annoying to many people. They were important for Gandhi. In a way, I guess they compensated for whatever problems he had with his family. But as I said, this is a whole parallel world that goes on, and I think a few people are. There is a book that I think is going to come out at some point by Ian Desai, which is, I think, going to talk exactly about this. It's going to be a fascinating book if it ever comes out, about Gandhi's involvement with all the random people in his ashram. So that's the so. But all this is going on at the same time. Peter, you also see Gandhi using food symbolically. He's aware of it. He's aware of it when he uses salt for the Dandi March, which again is ironical because actually Gandhi went through large parts of his life trying to have a salt-free diet. But he knew the value of salt for really poor people, which is why he chose salt as a means of protest. After the Dandi March, after going to jail, when he goes to meet Irwin, Lord Irwin, the Viceroy, for the Irwin Gandhi talks, again, while he's talking, he has to have his own food. So Miraben, Madeline Slade, has bought his food, which at that time was like dates and goat's milk yogurt. And she pours it out for him in one corner of like the Viceroy's office. And the Viceroy is interested in. Gandhi very pointedly tells Irwin, who is, you must remember, Irwin was a devout Christian, a very believing man. He says, look, I'm eating the food of the prophets, dates and yogurt, which again is quite biblical in that sense. And all this is calculated to some extent, Gandhi knew that this helped build his aura with the British, with his adversaries. And so while I don't think he chose to eat dates and yogurt just to impress Irwin, he didn't mind pointing out to Irwin that, yes, there was this link between him and sort of a biblical sort of like link. So a lot of that is very is definitely there in Gandhi's food choices. Am I boring the shit out of everybody? I wonder. I'm just talking, and I don't know if you're bemused or not.
No, I mean, I didn't know the trajectory that we were talking on, but I deliberately didn't read too deep in any of these subjects because I came to listen. But yeah.
To me, reading Gandhi's perspectives are very important, especially when you deal with a lot of current issues. Two issues in particular, I think are worth looking at. One is about the issue of meat eating, and the other is about cow protection, which are both like highly, I mean, I don't need to tell anybody what loaded these issues are. And Gandhi's perspectives on both of these are really interesting. I mean, Gandhi was devoutly vegetarian, as I said, there's no doubt about that. But he did not think people were bad because they ate meat. And that's really important because we are living in a culture where people who eat meat are seen as intrinsically bad, are being seen as there's something like wrong with them. And Gandhi did not believe in eating meat. He definitely wanted to advocate vegetarianism, but he also knew, and this is very key, that you cannot force people by shaming them. You cannot get people really to change their habits by forcing them to change. There's a very interesting discussion he has with somebody at some point about, it's a hypothetical question. Somebody raises that, somebody says that, it's a letter that I have become a vegetarian, but my wife has not. Should I compel her to become a vegetarian? And Gandhi writes back categorically saying, no, you cannot force your wife to become a vegetarian. In fact, since your wife is dependent on you, it is your duty to buy meat for her. But, so you can't force her, but you can try and convince her. And this is Gandhi's approach. I mean, Gandhi, and this is a very critical difference between Gandhi and various people in power today, that it is one thing to have a view, but you cannot get people to accept it by forcing them. You can convince people, and Gandhi believed in that. Okay, Gandhi was an expert in emotional blackmail. Emotional blackmail, in a sense, is the essence of satyagraha.
Yeah.
And
hunger strike is the ultimate emotional blackmail.
Yeah, absolutely. And he did emotional blackmail with his family. The one reason why he had such difficult relations with his family, because his basic means of communication with them was emotional blackmail. So he had no problems doing emotional blackmail and forcing people. But the essence of it still has to be people's choice. Now, one can raise questions like when you are, like, to take the most important example, when he fasts in the 1930s against the proposal to have separate electorates for for Dalits, for Harijans, that is too much for Gandhi. He is fine with reserved seats for Dalits, but he refuses to the idea of Dalits being a separate community, the way Muslims are. And he goes on to a fast unto death. And and that is the point under which a huge, essentially the fast unto death was emotional blackmail against Ambedkar. Because Ambedkar knew that if Gandhi died, the whole of India would blame him.
Yeah.
And so finally he agrees with a lot of reluctance, a lot of bitterness, let it be said, to Gandhi's proposal for reserved seats for scheduled castes and scheduled tribes, but not for separate electorates. And yes, it has its role in Ambedkar's ultimate decision to leave Hindus and become a Buddhist and become what he later became. But the fact is, Gandhi also won in the sense like we ended up with the system where we have today, where there are reserved seats for scheduled castes and scheduled tribes, but not a separate electorate. So, as I said, it's an open question about how far Gandhi was willing to take emotional blackmail as a tool. But I come back to that his answer to that hypothetical question to me, which is a very important passage, when he says that it is a husband's duty to buy meat for the wife if she's still eating meat, and at the same time you try and persuade her, give her all the arguments, thing like that, but you cannot use your position as a provider to force her to eat meat. And to me, this is a very key passage in Gandhi, because it shows the absolute difference between Gandhi's way of working and the way various people who I won't name, are operating today. So that is one. Yeah, I think Carl has given another anecdote, which is true. I'll just read it out. At Phoenix Ashram, some wives of Satyagraha people came to stay there. They were all Catholic. He called them and said he knew they eat meat and he would go buy it for them. But of course, it would require 2 kitchens, so it would be a bit of extra work for all people. The Catholic ladies said they'd all be happy to eat vegetarian, but thanks for the offer. So I'd forgotten this anecdote. Thanks, Carl, for reminding me of this. But yeah, that's an example of the Gandhian approach. And see, part of this is that he doesn't believe meat eaters are bad people. Okay, he thinks they're misguided, but they're not bad. And that is a huge difference with the way vegetarian is being promoted today. And I'm saying this as someone who I eat everything, though increasingly, and not just because of reading Gandhi, I'm increasingly more and more vegetarian. But it's a choice on my part, and it has to be a choice. One of the real ironies, this is something I write about as a food writer today, is that across the world, vegetarianism, veganism, Gandhi would have been a vegan today, if he had access to the sort of high protein, plant-based milk and products that we have. Veganism is soaring, it's becoming hugely important. Whereas in India, which is in a sense the home of vegetarian food, which has a vegetarian culture which is unrivaled anywhere else in the world, the meat consumption is rising in India. And this is a real irony. I mean, as I said, people who eat meat are not bad. But there are real consequences of eating meat in an unrestrained way. The environmental consequences are incredible. The level of animal cruelty involved in large-scale meat production is huge. I'm not even going to get into health arguments, because the health arguments are complicated and can be spun any way you want. But just these two issues of environmentalism, sustainability, and animal welfare are strong arguments for vegetarianism, and they're all arguments that Gandhi prefigures. But in India, we are going the opposite way despite our traditions. And to me, this is a real mockery of our traditions, and it springs from the way vegetarian is being pushed as the right way by some people, and the wrong way by some people. So to me, the Gandhian approach to vegetarianism is really important and incredibly relevant for today. The second issue linked to this is Gandhi and cow protection, because Gandhi was deeply involved with cow protection right through his life. But he was very well aware of the way cow protection was being used by a certain stream of Orthodox Hinduism, definitely not all Hindus, but a certain stream of Orthodox Hindus. We can call them Sanatana Hindus if you like, because he does use that term. As it was being weaponized by them against Dalits. As he says constantly, that Sanatan Hindus have no problem exploiting cows, and at the end of the cow's life, they will sell them to a Muslim or to a Harijan, a Dalit person, and then look down on them for eating the beef, despite the fact that they have set up the situation by, by breeding the cow and exploiting the cow for milk all its life. So he constantly calls out the hypocrisies of upper caste Hindus for, for insisting on the importance of milk, but and then setting up a situation where the cow will then be killed, and then looking down on the people who kill and eat the cow. He constantly calls them out for, like, leaving Dalits in such a bad position that they have nothing else to eat other than, like, what he calls meat and carrion, and then looking down on them for it. And at the same time, and this is also important, because this sort of distinction is being ignored by many of the people who push cow protection today. At the same time, Gandhi had a genuine, real interest in cows. I mean, he really liked cows. He appreciated animals in general. I mean, I'm going to digress here, but I mean, this is where there are always quirky sides to Gandhi. I mean, one of the quirkinesses to Gandhi is his attitude towards cleanliness. He's obsessed with cleanliness, and that extends to some extent to animals. So Gandhi was very pro cows and he was anti buffaloes, which is something I regret because I like buffaloes a lot, and I think buffaloes are very important to India, much more so than cows. But Gandhi disliked buffaloes because he saw them as wallowing in mud and basically dirty sort of things, whereas cows were nice and clean. Similarly, Gandhi did not really like dogs very much, but he actually liked cats. He was definitely a cat person. In Yerawada jail, there is a very nice series of letters that he writes where he's sharing a cell with Sardar Patel, and there's a cat, because there are often cats in jails, and the cat sort of adopts them, and they take care of the cat. There are these very poignant things of Sardar Patel, like him putting aside food for the cat and like taking care of the cat. And then Gandhi is very impressed because at some point the cat has kittens, and he sees and cats do this. He sees the cat teaching the kittens how to dig a hole and cover up their shit. And he was like, oh my God, how can we learn from the cat? Because cats cover up and take care of their own shit, and we don't do it. So he was very impressed with that particular aspect of cats. So sorry, I don't know why I got sidetracked onto Gandhi and cats, but yeah, I said totally
Fondness
cats.
for cows.
Huh?
Yeah, you went off from his fondness for cows and animals in general.
Yeah. So okay, so the fondness for cows, yes, because there's a very key incident way back in the Sabarmati ashram days, when there is a calf that is born at the ashram, and the calf is born severely severely malformed, and it is in a lot of pain, and is clearly not going to live very long, but is in pain. And so Gandhi is faced. Gandhi had a very charismatic dairyman called Balwant Sinha, who wrote a book later on called Under the Shadow of Gandhi, which is worth reading, mainly because Balwant Sinha had a sort of protected position in Gandhi's life because he took care of the cows, but he also fought with everybody else. And yet Gandhi had a sort of inexplicable fondness for Balwant Sinha, partly because he took care of the cows. Gandhi's faced with this dilemma: what to do with this calf? The calf is going to die at some point. It is clearly in a lot of pain. Should Gandhi euthanize the calf? And he takes a decision to euthanize the calf. So he calls a vet, and the vet injects it with anesthesia, and the calf dies. Incidentally, of course, today Gandhi would be prosecuted in large parts of India for doing this. Keep this in mind. But he is at peace with his decision. He has saved the calf a lot of suffering, and he writes about it in his thing. And there is this furor. Okay, there is this outrage. All these people whose descendants we now see like manning the cow protection bandwagon are outraged, saying, "How can you call yourself an ahimsa? You have killed a cow, not just an animal. You've killed the calf. You've killed the calf." And this discussion goes on for weeks and weeks, with all these people writing angry letters to Gandhi saying, "How have you killed a calf?" And Gandhi was like, to me, this is a test of satyagraha. Not when you have to take an unpopular decision. And I took the right decision. The calf was suffering. The calf was in pain. The ahimsa answer in this point was to put it out of its pain. And that is Gandhi's answer. And to me, that is really important because it shows that Gandhi was aware of the suffering of cows. He understood the suffering of cows. One of the horrible, horrible ironies of the whole cow protection movement is that it does not give shit for the suffering of cows. Cows in India suffer hugely as they are abandoned. And yes, they're supposed to be gaushalas, they're supposed to be things like that. It is clearly not adequate. I live in Goa, where abandoned cows are a huge issue. There are supposed to be gaushalas, money is going to these gaushalas. The gaushalas are not, despite all this, Goa is full of wandering cows. If anybody has walked, I mean, there are stories almost every week in the papers about the stray cow menace because, especially in South Goa and Cancun, there are areas where these huge herds of abandoned cows, which are like wandering on the highways, and they get hit all the time, and they get and they die. To some extent, it's also a racket, as always in Goa, because what has happened is the owners of these cows have abandoned the cows, but they're still sort of keeping an eye on it. Any motorist kills a cow, then suddenly they're like, "Oh my God, you killed my cow! Now you pay me money." It is a complete racket. I mean, it's made driving in Goa a real nightmare. In the rain, it was a nightmare because all the roads became this slick of like cow dung and water, and people were skidding and having accidents outside thing. And these cows are in a terrible shape. I mean, yes, okay, they have food in the sense there's grass and post the monsoon, there are plants everywhere, but they are hit by the car. They're hit by cars all the time. There are many three-legged calves. There are calves who are starving. You know, there are cows. There's one right near my house. You know, whose horn has grown so large it's like piercing into its cheek. I mean, that we might be able to find somebody to help. But all these people in Goa is a BJP-run state. You know, who talk about the protection of cows they don't give a damn about the actual suffering of cows. And Gandhi did. And to me, this is a very key difference between Gandhi's approach to cows and Gandhi and the sort of the so-called cow protection people today.
But part of the whole thing of the dairy industry is then, you know, things like once the cow is not producing milk, what happens? What happens to bull cows, right?
Exactly. And this is where and as I said, Gandhi today would have been a vegan, 100%, because he was always uncomfortable, as you said earlier, with drinking milk. He saw it as stealing from the cow and stealing from the goat also. He would have instinctively understood what the vegan movement understands, that you cannot have cruelty-free dairy. It is impossible. There's always an exploitation. There's always going to be suffering of cows, even if you don't kill them. I mean, the current Gau Sevaks think that they are not exploiting cows by not killing them, but they have no problems exploiting them for milk all their lives, and then like abandoning them to starve and get hit by calves. Gandhi would have instinctively understood that the answer to it is no dairy. That dairying involves cruelty at some point, and you cannot have dairy without cruelty to cows. So if you love cows, you should not eat dairy. It's as simple as that. And I'm saying this as somebody who eats dairy myself. And I'm aware, and I'm aware of the problems, and I'm aware that there are ways in which the cruelty can be mitigated, and there are people who are trying to do it, and that's admirable. But at the end of the day, there is an exploitation of cows that happens, and the vegan movement is right. I mean, if you really want to stop the exploitation of cows, you have to give up dairy, and you have to move to all the amazing plant-based sources of milk which are available today, which Gandhi never had. Sorry, end of rant.
Yeah, and it's interesting also, I think you've written about this as well, right? About how the cow protection movement, the opposition to Gandhi, by Gandhi saying, no, we will not mandate against cow slaughter. We will not put that in the constitution. Yeah. And how elements of what was then the opposition to Gandhi, the right wing of that time,
yeah,
leapt on that bandwagon and have kept it rolling ever since.
Absolutely. I mean, the reality is that the cow protection movement reinvented itself for a particular reason, to make up for the fact that people involved with it had killed Gandhi. It's as simple as that. I'm not by any means saying that the entire cow protection movement, the entire Hindutva crowd was involved with the killing of Gandhi. That's wrong. It was fanatics and like the Godses who involved. But the fact is that after Gandhi's assassination, the government, the Congress government cracked down on the RSS, the Hindu Mahasabha, everybody. And they were seen as people who had contributed to the killing of Gandhi. To revive themselves politically, cow protection was very tactically was used as a tactic, because it was one theme which had long-standing roots from even before Gandhi's assassination, and had some sort of political value, and had certain sort of Hindu relevance. And through the 1950s and the 1960s, it was a very organized movement to use cow protection as a way to bring the Hindutva movement back to respectability and back to political viability. I've written about this extensively in other places, so I won't go into it over here. I mean, in a sense, the irony is that it has landed the BJP with a problem it can't be solved. I mean, the reality, as I said, is that you cannot have dairying without exploitation of cows. You cannot have dairying without killing cows. And the one person who understood this above all was Dr. V.K. Kurian of Amul. In his autobiography, which is a really interesting autobiography because Amul was started by Gandhians. And Kurian definitely would not have described himself as a Gandhian, but he's somebody who I think Gandhi would have appreciated for his very practical, no nonsense, and focused on results. And this is despite Kurian remaining, as he said, a beef-eating Malu all his life. In the 1960s, to deal with this issue of the growing power of the cow protection issue, a committee is formed. This is after the really huge attack on Parliament by the Gau Sevaks. We talk about attack on Parliament, but we forget that the first attack on Parliament was led by the cow protection movement in the 1960s, and it was a pretty crazy attack. I mean, there are pictures which are there in the Times archives, which were never published at that time because they are. I mean, I published them in the Economic Times to some extent, but they're pretty startling pictures. They show these like naked sadhus waving trishuls, rampaging across the lawns of Parliament. And and they actually burned some few structures and things like that. So
one policeman was stoned to death.
I've forgotten that detail, but
after you told me about it. So one cop was killed, and then in the firing after that, 6 or 7 other people from the rioters were killed.
But there were definitely, some structures were set on flame, a couple of cars were set on flame, and yes, it was a full-on attack. Now, to deal with the fallout of this, Indira Gandhi, who had just become prime minister at that point, sets up a committee on cow protection, just to deal with the issue. And Kurian is part of the committee. And various members, including the people from the RSS, are also part of the committee. And they push very hard for what is happening today, for the cow being declared like a sacred animal, national animal, things like that. And Kurian refuses it because Kurian says, I'm trying to create this new dairy revolution. We cannot have dairy without allowing the cows to be killed. And single-handedly, Kurian, at that point, stops the committee coming to any recommendation of protection of cows. And at some point, the committee is just disbanded. For this reason, the Kurian is now a persona non grata with the BJP in Gujarat. I mean, they talk about him being a beef-eating Malu, and Kurian was the pride of Gujarat, of Amul, and he's now like seen as a pariah. And partly this is because of this, but the BJP has landed itself in this dilemma. It doesn't know what to do now because the cows are suffering. The farmers are suffering because cows are like wandering. It's one of the issues that has come up in the farm protests, how to deal with this problem of stray cattle. And yet the issue is in the DNA of the BJP. It would not be where it is if it had not gone on the cow protection bandwagon in the 1950s. And as I said, Gandhi is aware of all the issues involved in this. He's aware of the problems is involved in cow protection is important, right? Through the 1930s. He's always involved in the committees, and he's always trying to find this balance between protecting the cow and the interests of the Dalits and Muslims. And it's one of the battles he never really wins. And but he was aware of all the contradictions that are now blowing up in our face today. Sorry, we've like gone a bit far from.
No, that is, I mean, it's an important part of the thing of where Gandhi's attitudes are the long-term effects that are here now still happening around us. But yeah, just those of you in the audience, if you have questions at any point, you can put them in text, or you could do the Zoom raise hand gesture. And
I mean, if you want to ask about particular foods, you can, because I mean, I may not always remember, but like there are some lots, once you go through the thing, I said Gandhi talks about all kinds of things, and some of he's really always interesting. So for instance, honey is an interesting issue. And again, I work with Under the Mango Tree, which is an organization that promotes beekeeping for livelihoods. And one of the issues we often get is this issue of ahimsa honey. Is honey cruelty free? And there are many vegans who refuse to eat honey because they see it as the exploitation of bees. And Gandhi is actually aware of this because he does eat honey. It's one of the few sources of sugar that he eats. And he drinks honey with soda bicarb and one of it every day, warm water with bicarbonate of soda and honey.
Drinking tea, right? Gandhi stopped drinking tea.
Okay, that tea is very interesting. We'll come back to tea in a minute. Let me just finish this thing about honey. So one day he receives a present of honey, and he rejects it because he said that there were all this debris in the honey. There was all this a few dead bees and things like that. And he said clearly this honey has come from breaking beehives. And if you've ever seen this, you have all these guys who go around. Even in a city like Bombay, breaking the rock beehives that build up in cities, and then they'll try and sell you the honey, and the honey is full of debris and dead bees. And Gandhi's like, this is wrong. I mean, we cannot get honey by breaking hives. We have to, and this is why Gandhi is not a purist for like Indian ways. He says the Western way of beekeeping in hives allows you to extract honey without damaging the bee, and it's absolutely true. I mean, when you have honey in a hive with slats, you can take the slat out, and we do this in Under the Mango Tree. You could take the slat out where the bees have built the honeycomb and filled it with honey. You have the centrifuge, a hand-pumped centrifuge, where you can do it very gently. You turn the centrifuge, and the honey spins out, and then you can put the slat back with the honeycomb undamaged, and the bees will fill it up again. And you have to be careful never to take all the honey. You have to leave at least 1/3 of the honey for the bees. And that's how a responsible beekeeper works. If it's done in this way, our argument at least, I mean, hardcore vegans may not appreciate it, but our argument Under the Mango Tree is that bees are the one exception to the long history of exploitation of animals. Because bees and humans can really partner each other. Because humans protect the hives, they through the lean season, which is the monsoon, you can actually give a little bit of sugar to sustain the bees through the monsoon. And then once the monsoon is over, the bees go out, they pollinate the fields. And one of the main things that Under the Mango Tree is that the main reason you keep bees is for pollination, not for like honey, because pollination is critical. I mean, we have done studies at Under the Mango Tree, which shows the difference in production, especially of say vegetable crops. If you have a beehive nearby, and again, it has to be beehive with Indian bees, because European honeybees only go to 2 or 3 types of plants, whereas Indian honeybees, Apis cerana, go to a wide range of plants. So basically what Under the Mango Tree does is we promote people to do beekeeping for livelihoods using Indian bees, which are suited to India, which don't produce that much honey. And the problem, again, this is the issues, how these issues come up. Like the problem with the mainstream honey industry, it's all targeted at European honeybees because they produce shitloads of honey. But they do that from a very limited number of plants. And quite often the beekeepers just give them sugar. So basically the bees are just eating sugar and vomiting it up. And so there's actually very little benefit involved when they're not going from plant to plant. Whereas Indian honeybees will actually go to a wide range of plants, will pollinate, so produce yields increase, and will produce honey. So as I said, often when reading through Gandhi, I find that there are small snippets here which show how he was aware of some of these issues. Okay, somebody wants to know about tea. Okay, tea is interesting because we now take tea as such an essential part of Indian culture, but it absolutely was not. Tea's history across India as a as a drink, as a source of consumption for Indians is barely 100 years old. Um, tea grows wild in the Northeast, and tea plantations were developed in the Northeast and in the Nilgiris by the British, but to supply the British market. It was not interested in India. The plantations were set up as a way to break the stranglehold of tea that the Chinese market, that the Chinese had. It was a very clear aim to break the Chinese market and to set up an Indian source of tea for the British market. They were not interested in selling tea to Indians. It was only from the 1910s onwards, by which time the production of tea has reached such high levels that the British need to find other markets, and they suddenly realized, oh my God, why don't we just sell it in India? Because anyway, we're growing it in India. So a whole committee is set up by the British, by the plantation industry. It's called the Tea Cess Committee, because a small percentage of tea sales goes to funds this committee, and it's set up to market tea to India. So from the 1910s, 1920s onwards, the Tea Cess Committee, which later becomes the Tea Board, sets this huge campaign out to market tea to Indians. And honestly, Indians did not have any habit of drinking tea, and many of them were actually resistant to drinking tea. Tea drinking existed among elites who were copying the British, and in a few communities to some extent. But I mean, there are many other stories, like in Gujarat, for instance, when they started promoting tea, people ate the tea. People thought the tea leaves were to eat, so they ate the tea leaves as a sort of sabji. The real breakthrough with tea happened sometime in the 1920s, early 1930s, when people realized that by making chai, basically adding tea to milk, works. So because Indians will love milk. I mean, with all the exploitation of cows that it involves. So that's when chai becomes a way for tea to spread in India. But Gandhi, this happened very much in Gandhi's lifetime, and he hated it. He was aware of tea's the huge levels of exploitation involved in the plantation labor of producing tea. He was also well aware of how tea was an imperial product. It was a product sold by the British to benefit the British, and the plantation owners who were overwhelmingly British. And I drink tea. I'm a great tea drinker, but it's true that the roots of tea in India lie in imperial exploitation. And Gandhi hated tea. I mean, he hated tea even earlier than that, because this was something he learned from the Kellogg's and the American sort of things, which saw tea and coffee as stimulants. So he disliked both tea and coffee. He did not serve them in the ashram, except to some extent when there were guests from outside. What he served in the ashram was wheat coffee, what he called wheat coffee, which is basically, it's a nice drink. I mean, you can take wheat berries, wheat grain, and you roast them. You roast them till they're almost burnt, and then you put them in water, hot water at once. And actually, it's a really nice drink, Peter. We were talking a bit earlier about how caffeine, you can't take too much caffeine. But if you want a drink that tastes sort of like thing, which has a nice toasty, grainy taste, this is actually not a bad alternative. It's something that is drunk a lot in Japan and Korea. So if you go to Japanese and Korean restaurants, you'll have these barley tea and grain teas, which are served to you as a matter of course. And this was what Gandhi served in, this is what people drank in the ashram. Basically, this roasted wheat berries. You can actually roast rice and any grain, but wheat works particularly well. Roasted wheat berries steeped in hot water.
I was thinking also about the entire bee scene and the bee crisis that's happening right now, and a vegan point of view. Yeah. It says there's a large number of fruit that you shouldn't be eating because the perspective is that it exploits the labor of bees. So the hipster favorite avocado, for instance, without pollination by these traveling beekeepers, which, I mean, it's a point of view, but I just thought the bee crisis is something that's very real.
I mean, I said, I respect people's point of views. I honestly feel that done properly, beekeeping is one of the very rare examples where humans and animals can form partnerships and without exploiting each other. And honey sustainably harvested is the result of that.
Yeah, and then there's the other, I mean, coming back to something earlier, that other intersection of Gandhi and Sherlock Holmes, keeping in the later years. But yes, Carl, I'm going to ask you to join in the conversation if you so desire. And other folks here, if you have questions, you could put them in chat. You could use the Zoom raise hands gesture if you'd like to just talk, or if you want to come on camera, just send me a message and I'll promote you to a panelist. I'm glad to have Carl joining us.
Great, Carl.
Carl is, well, I've spoken about Carl earlier in this conversation. Carl has been helpfully putting these little links to things that we've been talking about in the Gandhi, collected works. Thanks for coming in, Carl.
My pleasure. This has been fascinating. Very, very, very interesting.
Yeah, because Peter tells me that you're also somebody who, like me, read his way through all like 100 volumes chronologically.
No, that's not true. I put all the volumes online, and as such, I have touched them at some level, but no, I did not read them all. I have read extensively about Gandhi. One of the things I've done is I've taken like Ram Guha's biography of Gandhiji, and then looked in the footnotes and went and bought as many of the books as I could find that he was citing, and I put those online, so that as you're reading the biography that Ram did so brilliantly, you can look at my notes of Guha on Gandhi and go click into the various volumes and see what it was he said. So.
And that's really important because, Gandhi encouraged everyone in the ashram to keep diaries. Many of the ashram people, many of the close associates wrote books which are published by Navjeevan. And as I said, the quality of these books is not great, but they often provide really fascinating and oddball glimpses of Gandhi, like the goat wrangling with Mirabai.
Carl had another interesting story, which after I first met him, he had been contacted by the Indian consulate in Los Angeles, which had the cartons of all the books that Richard Attenborough had bought when he was reading, in preparation for making Gandhi. And they were wondering what to do with the books. And the consul said, just contact Carl. And so Carl went back home to a carton of Richard Attenborough's reference material.
5 cartons. This was over 300 books, including a whole bunch of old and rare Navjeevan press books. There were original screenplays for the movie, which I haven't posted because those might be under copyright. But the Navjeevan Trust, they don't care, and we've got a very large collection of their works online.
I may be wrong, but I think the one book that influenced Attenborough the most is actually still one of the most impressive. That's the Louis Fisher biography. To me, that is a truly amazing book, not least because it was written while Gandhi was still alive. The book stops before Gandhi's assassination. And it shows, I think, what an extraordinarily perceptive journalist Louis Fisher was, that he understood many of the key conflicts of Gandhi, particularly to deal with his family issues and the complexities and sometimes the failings in Gandhi's approaches. And it is all there, very much so in Louis Fisher's biography of Gandhi, which, as I said, came out before Gandhi died, and he didn't have the experience of hindsight and access to the collected works that everybody did after the 1960s. I don't know if you know this, but I mean, Fisher also wrote another book called A Week with Gandhi, which is actually very well worth reading. It's not easy to get. I got a copy from Mani Bhavan. But it actually involves, it's based on his diary of his actual field work at being with Gandhi. And this is when he goes to the ashram and lives in Wardha. And among other things, records quite frankly how absolutely horrible the food at the ashram was. I mean, this is a complaint many people involved with Gandhi said, that, the food was horrible. The one person who actually challenged Gandhi on this was actually his granddaughter, Ela Gandhi. And several years back, I was in South Africa and I actually went to meet her. She was a lovely lady, and she has some wonderful stories about Gandhi. And one story which she told me was that she had gone to Sevagram, And he was talking to her one day and she was like, why do you call this place Sevagram? It should be called Kaddu Gram because all you eat is pumpkins, Kaddu. And Gandhi got the point and he laughed and he said, okay, maybe we're eating too many pumpkins at the moment, so let's try and eat some other kinds of vegetables. But the truth is, I mean, the food at Gandhi's actual food is pretty dire.
Sukada has a question in the Q&A, which she says, what was Gandhi's opinion on austerity in everyday food, in ordinary meals? The Q&A box.
Q&A box. Yeah, who's this from?
Sukada Chaudhary.
Yeah. Sorry, I can't seem to see this.
The question is, what was Gandhi's opinion about austerity in everyday food and meals?
I mean, he believed in being frugal and regularly taking regular fasts. So I mean, the sort of intermittent fasting that has suddenly become a like diet trend today was very much something Gandhi would have advocated. I mean, yes, he did believe that you should not become obsessed with food. And so, for instance, and I would say this is something that Nico Slate talks about quite nicely. Gandhi did have a sweet tooth, and giving up sweets and sugar, and except eating only honey and palm jaggery to some extent, was a cost to him. But he did believe in disciplining himself and not indulging in himself. So yes, I mean he did believe in austere diets. Somebody else.
Arjun Bali was asking one about related matters. One about Gandhi's views on ganja and other smokables.
I don't.
And also on alcohol and why the Gujarat insistence on prohibition.
Yeah, so again, the prohibition again has roots with Gandhi's involvement in the vegetarian movement because the vegetarian movement was closely involved with the temperance movement, which was extremely big at that time and had actually succeeded in imposing prohibition in the USA, which of course was a political disaster. And it's true, Gandhi's roots on alcohol, while some of it it was influenced by his sort of Vaishnava beliefs, but I think it was particularly strong from his learnings from the temperance movement, which was linked, which had very close links with the vegetarian movement. And it was a failure. I mean, and this was a failure that was pointed out in the Constituent Assembly. Because there is a long discussion about prohibition in the Constituent Assembly, and it's true that many of the people advocating for prohibition are advocating it from they claim a Gandhian point of view, and there are two fascinating speeches which are given to counter this. One of them is from a guy called B.H. Khardekar, who was a member of the Constituent Assembly from Kolhapur, and very little is known about him because he pretty much just gives this speech and one other speech, but the speech is magnificent. I mean, anybody who's interested in prohibition should look up Khardekar's speech in the Constituent Assembly. Again, the Constituent Assembly debates are fascinating and up there, available for everybody to read on the Parliament of India website. And there are search engines that help you search for them. And Khardekar gives this amazing speech in defense of alcohol and the problems that are going to come from imposing prohibition. And everything that he says is absolutely true. I mean, that it will involve increase in corruption. It will be badly policed. There will be bad alcohol. And basically you are taking away a choice from people. And that, yes, you can encourage people not to drink, but if you take away a choice, you will force them to drink badly. You will cause an increase in crime. Exactly what was being seen in the US and which had been a failure in the US. He's supported by his name I've forgotten now, Jagannath Munda, I think, who is an Adivasi activist who talks about the long tribal traditions of drinking alcohol in India and why this should not be imposed why these should not be imposed on people. And both speeches are absolutely right. I mean, they're brilliant and they're absolutely true. And everything that we know about Gujarat and the ridiculousness of prohibition in Gujarat, where people drink like crazy, but it's all in private, it's all hypocritical, and it's all until somebody wants to crack down on you, then they crack down on you. I mean, prohibition is a farce, and these two speeches in the Constituent Assembly just showed us that.
This question from Mukta Rath in the Q&A, who asks, did Gandhi follow Ayurveda? Because a lot of his dietary choices seem to reflect that.
Gandhi was very interested in Ayurveda. He was interested in yoga. But as I said, the roots of his thinking were actually pretty much Western. So while he was interested in them and he read up about them and he had people advising him both on Ayurveda and yoga, I don't think they were as foundational to him as his experiences in learning about vegetarianism from the Western vegetarian. So Gandhi is actually a pretty Western figure in many ways, and that's his fascination. He blends a Western way of activism with a sort of instinctive in Indian understanding, and an instinctive way to connect with Indians. I mean, and that perhaps is why he's so successful and different from many of the other activists at that time. But he knew, yes, he was interested in it, and he experimented.
I mean, what a lot of people seem to keep forgetting actually about Gandhi is that how much of his life he had spent in that formative parts where he was forming his opinions and everything was in the UK, was in South Africa before
Exactly.
he came in.
Yeah.
And he was an older man by the time he came in here with a lot of opinions formed by what he had seen in the activism.
Yeah, Amy wants to know what about Gandhiji and his fast, both his regular health fast as well as his Bhukh Hartal fast. Did he consume? Yes, he did consume water. He drank, even in his extreme fasts, he would drink water mixed with lime juice and soda, bicarbonate of soda, baking soda basically. So yes, even in his fast, he did consume water mixed with baking soda or lime.
Paul, do you want to just comment on any other stuff that you are thinking about that you would like to chat about?
Yeah, I was actually looking for, in volume 27 of the collected works, I wrote about this in my book, Code Swaraj. Gandhiji was invited to give a commencement address at an Ayurvedic university. And he went, and he stood up, and he totally trashed the entire enterprise. He said, look, there's a lot of charlatans out there that are selling false cures that are no good, and everyone was totally aghast. And, you know, he had the same opinion about many Western doctors, but this was an Ayurvedic university. And so the board of directors wrote to him afterwards and said, oh my gosh, please repudiate what you said. And he said, no, I meant what I said. You asked me to speak and I spoke. So he was worried that a lot of people were trying to give magic cures to others and taking their money. And that was both Western medicine and Eastern medicine. So.
I mean, again, this is a contrast with what we see, you know, happening with people in power today. I mean, Gandhi believed in the value of Indian traditions, but he was not an unthinking, acceptor of Indian traditions. He was well aware of the failings, the shortcomings of many Indian traditions, and he interrogated things, which is what you should do. I mean, he never accepted something just because it was said, this is an Indian tradition, you have to accept it. No, he thought about it, and where it was relevant and where he felt it was of use, he did accept it. But you do, and this you get from the collected works. You see him thinking about things. You see him debating, you see him arguing, you see him asking for expert opinions from a range of people, Indian and Western. I mean, he got opinions from, Indian Ayurveds and doctors, but he also got opinions from Western doctors. I mean, there's a very interesting correspondence which he carries out with this guy called Robert McCarrison, who is in the history of nutrition is a very important figure. Robert McCarrison was a doctor who worked in India. If you look at the website of the National Institute of Nutrition, it's one government website which still has a photograph of the founder, Robert McCarrison, on it. And McCarrison did a lot of really key work in India, looking at different diets, because like many people during the Raj, he realized India was a fascinating place to experiment because you had so many different climates, so many different diets, so many people. So he was able to look at the effect of different diets on people's welfare. He was able to, again, another thing that people investigated a lot was the impact of deficiency diseases, because in the early 20th century, it's when when we see that the problems that arise from new diets that come, which often lead to deficiency diseases. The big example of this is actually corn, because corn gets popularized across the world in the 19th century, and corn production spreads even in India. I'm talking about sweet corn, American corn, maize. And to some extent, corn succeeds. I'm sorry, I'm diverging a bit over here, but corn succeeds by displacing millets, because corn grows faster than millets. Corn looks better, it's more like, it's better tasting crop than more millets. It looks beautiful golden color. But the problem with corn is a very big problem, that some of the essential nutrients in corn, vitamin A in particular, niacin, are bound in the structure and are not freely available unless it's treated with lime, unless it's treated by this with something alkaline, which is something Mexicans for whom the crop is a native crop knew. And in Mexico, there is this process of cooking corn grains with lime, a process that's called nixtamalization, which is very crucial because it changes both the composition and releases the nutrients in corn. So Mexicans do not suffer from the deficiency disease called beriberi. But suddenly, as corn spreads across the world, beriberi emerges as a disease out of nowhere and becomes a plague across in Africa, parts of India. And it's only in the early 20th century that the link between corn and beriberi is examined. So I'm sorry, I'm diverging a bit, but McCarrison and a few other people, Lucy Willets is another person in Bombay, are these British scientists who study Indian diets, and Gandhi is aware of this, and he corresponds with McCarrison, he's open to influences of all kinds.
Any other questions, folks? What was the bit about baking soda? Gandhi used baking soda and lime. Okay.
Yeah, it just Gandhi took soda by cup, I think, simply because it reduces acidity.
Yeah, you touched on that, that he didn't like dals because of the acidity issues, right?
Because of the gas. Because of the gas. I mean, yeah, I think it's as simple as that. But I mean, he ate a lot of moong dal because he saw moong dal as the most easily digestible dal. He recommended people, consume the water in which moong dal is cooked in. What in Gujarat you make what's called an osaman or something like that. But yeah, he was skeptical about pulses, and he didn't have access to all the soy proteins that we have today, or the pea proteins that we have today.
Really interesting.
And especially sensitive stomach as well, I think. So that was one of his sensitivities to that.
One of the interesting things I've always thought about Gandhi is that he was not afraid to change his mind on stuff.
Absolutely, yeah. So he always interrogated. I said onions are an example. He went through most of the 1920s not eating onions and garlic, and suddenly in the 1930s he realizes onions and garlic are good for him and starts eating onions and garlic in a huge way. So yeah, he's willing to change his mind.
What do you think of the long-term effects? Aside from we talked about the cow protection and that part of it, but what are the other effects do you think Gandhi's influence on India? How has it affected our food industries, the way we eat and all that? What kind of long-term effects do you think there have been, aside from this one part?
I mean, Beria Elvin has a funny comment in one of his books where he thinks he blames Gandhi and the frankly horrible food at the ashrams for the fact that government institutional food in India is terrible. Many people have complained about it, that if you go to government functions, the food is pretty bad. At least it was in the 1950s and 1960s. But I mean, one also has to keep in mind 1950s and 1960s were times of huge food shortages in India. And yes, the government didn't feel comfortable correctly in spending a lot of money on food. As I said, Gandhi was really aware of the huge reality of hunger in India, and in a way that I think many politicians have not been. I'm wrong about that. In the 1950s and up to the 1960s, it was an issue. Politicians were acutely aware of the reality of hunger. To some extent, we have started forgetting it. I mean, it appears as a political issue at times, but just earlier this week, there was a shocking study that came out in the Times and a few other papers about how across the world the average heights of children is increasing across generations. India is the one place where it is not increasing, and in the case of many women, it is actually decreasing. And this is shocking that we may have conquered basic hunger to some extent, but malnutrition is still such a gigantic issue. And this is something Gandhi would have cared deeply about, and he would try to find solutions which are not politicized solutions. I mean, as I said, he was not dogmatic. I mean, he did not, for instance, he did not eat eggs himself. But at one point, when Kasturba was really sick, and the doctor suggested that she eats eggs, he says, well, maybe you should consider this, and he investigates about unfertilized eggs and whether these can be considered vegetarian. He comes to the conclusion that yes, unfertilized eggs can be considered vegetarian, and he suggests to Kasturba, yes, you should try these. I mean, she refuses and ultimately recovers. I mean, so for instance, the way in which, for instance, we in midday meal schemes in Madhya Pradesh and a few other states, people are cutting eggs out of the program. It's truly shocking because again. The sort of eggs that were being produced by at least some of the schools for these programs were locally sourced eggs from local women who had backyard flocks of chicken and produced eggs and supplied them for the midday meal schemes. Many of them were also cooking in the kitchens. It was a perfect solution. It was a locally sourced solution which poured money back into the community, which increased the nutrition. That was a solution Gandhi would have appreciated. And to find this just being cut for political reasons because certain so-called, self-described Hindutva ideologues say that eggs are not acceptable, it's truly shocking.
Yeah, this affected the midday meal schemes because ISKCON was providing them, and ISKCON said no eggs, and that became a rather large issue in some places because that's what. For many children, that was the only source. That midday meal egg was their main source of protein for pretty much the entire day. I mean, the midday meal scheme itself has been something that has given children in so many parts of the country one solid, good, nutritious meal, which they may not be getting at other points in time.
But at the same time, Gandhi would have suggested alternatives, and that people are giving alternatives. I mean, there are alternatives like moringa, for instance, which is drumstick leaves, which are very high protein. And in Africa, there are these schemes where schools cultivate moringa drumsticks, not as trees, but as these hedges, because they're not growing the trees for the drumstick, not for the vegetable, but they're growing them for the leaves. So you create these hedges of moringa, which you then harvest and cook with the meals. And it's actually a fantastic solution because the gardens are maintained by the schools, by the school children. The leaves are very high in iron and protein and are used in the meal. So there are a range of solutions which I think someone like Gandhi would definitely have considered and encouraged.
One of the things that we were chatting about at another point in time, and considering your particular, reluctance to do the social media blog scenario over time, that Gandhi would have been a pretty good blogger.
Oh, absolutely. He would have been great at Twitter. I mean, you can see that. I mean, he's especially in the collected works, because one thing that I think Carl would agree with me that surprises you is that how short many of the communications are. And the collected works, the team collected it. Just many of them are just like one or two scribble lines, but they're there in the collected works. So yeah, he had no problems being really succinct. And to the point, and sometimes startling. He would have been great on Twitter.
I can imagine an Instagram account that took off from Gandhi's food diaries and posted what Gandhi ate. If people were to put that out, I think that would be pretty much fun to do on Instagram. Sorry, Carl, you were saying.
One of the things that always amazed me is when Gandhiji was in Bengal and he was going through the villages and he was speaking in 2 or 3 villages every day, and then he'd be on the train all night. And he'd get on that train and he'd write 30 letters,
yeah.
right? Little short ones, but he'd write them out and he'd hand them over to Miravan, and then he'd get up and he'd go give another speech. And if you look at Young India and Indian Opinion and these other things, and the volume of his output was just tremendous. So yes, he would have been a blogger. He would have been on Twitter. He really, reaching out to people was what he did. I try to tell people that Gandhi, when you think of bread labor, you think of him and his spinning wheel. But his first bread labor at the Phoenix Ashram was typesetting. That's what they did, is they came in and everybody had to do typesetting every day, including Gandhi Ji. And Gandhi Ji was not very good at typesetting. He made mistakes, but he was an amazing editor. He was an amazing writer. But that was bread labor for him, was blogging in the early days. And it was only later on that it was spinning thread.
He was also good at monetizing. Remember, he's also a good Gujarati Banya. So for instance, from the 1930s onwards, as Gandhi becomes famous, everywhere he goes, people are asking him for his autograph. And he says, well, I'll sign it. You give me 5 rupees. And that 5 rupees is going into the funds for the usually for Navjeevan or the Harijan publication. So basically, I mean, he has no problems monetizing his autograph. You know, if he was willing to sign an autograph, you had to pay him, and that's how he raised money for like a lot of his publications. We finished exactly 2 hours, Peter. I can't believe we've managed to spend 2 hours talking about Gandhi, and we haven't scared most people away. That is, I suppose, quite an achievement. Thank you for giving me this opportunity. Thanks, Carl, for coming. And, thank you for your work. I mean, the work you're doing is seriously important. I mean, and the fact that you're so committed to keeping all this Gandhian material out there at a time when we know that there are many people who would like to suppress these voices and suppress the realities of what Gandhi said. So, thank you very much from all of us for all your amazing work.
My pleasure. I just wish I could be back in India. It's something I was making in 2019. I spent 150 nights in Indian hotel rooms. And, on March 10th, I was in Delhi. I was just starting a 30-day trip. And I turned around and came home. And I have basically not left the house since then. But I am in close touch with my Indian colleagues, and the impact of COVID in India has been horrific. So I just look forward to the day that I can get back on an airplane and come see everybody.
Carl, do you want to take a couple of minutes to just tell people what your work is? I know I summarized a little bit of it earlier, but do you want to take a couple of minutes to talk about that?
Sure. So I run Public Resource, and we're a nonprofit organization, and we're best known for making edicts of government available. So the state of Georgia sued me for posting the laws of the state of Georgia on the internet. They actually called me a terrorist in the suit, and that went to the US Supreme Court, and we won. And in India, my work there began recently on posting the Indian standards. And as Peter said, the government was not pleased. But as part of my work there, whenever I came to India, I would go to the printing divisions, the publication, and they have a bookstore in Delhi, and I'd buy 100 kilos of books. I'd buy the speeches of prime ministers, and I'd put them in my luggage, and I'd fly home, and I'd scan them. I'd give them to the Internet Archive to scan. And then I convinced Brewster Kahle to give me a couple scanners, and we put one at the Indian Academy of Sciences in Bangalore. We've got one at the Konkani Center. We've got another one that's in Mangalore. And then we've got a scanner at the Roja Muthaya Library. So we've been systematically buying and scanning as many old books as we can. But the other thing I've done, and this is where I've occasionally had issues with your government, is if I see a large collection of public domain books online, like the West Bengal Public Library or the Digital Library of India, which the government used to run, they had 5 lakh books online. It was a really bad server. I made a copy of it and I put them on the Internet Archive, and I've been systematically doing that. I've got probably 1,000 books from the publications division. So not only the collected works of Gandhi Ji, but biographies of the makers of modern India, and a book on how to wear a sari, and a book on the lamps of Gujarat. There's about 30,000 videos in our collection. We call it the Public Library of India. We have I put a copy of the Ramayana online, all 78 episodes that were on Doordarshan. And the theory there, so I'm careful. I've been a professional writer, and I used to make a living off royalties. And so if a book is in print, Oxford University print, I don't do that. But if a book was done by the government, or a video, which in this case, Doordarshan was a government operation, I am, quite frankly, taking those, even though they say copyright, and I'm putting them online, and I'm very careful to say that this is for, non-commercial use. And in this time of COVID, it's important that people have access. So we've got, 7 locked books online now. We've had 13 crore views on this collection, so it's pretty popular. We've also got 6 locked copies of the official gazettes from not only the union government, from all the states, and those are searchable in the Indian languages. We actually did optical character recognition in Hindi and all the different Indian languages, and we taught the Internet Archive how to do OCR in the Indian languages, so that all this stuff is becoming more searchable. And I get takedown notices sometimes that say you can't. So a lot of times this material's online, but the organization, either government or non-governmental, thinks they are the only one that's allowed to have this material. And they put it online, and you have to register, and there's a CAPTCHA device, and you can't actually download the damn thing. It's in a screen viewer. So we'll take these and bring them in and turn them back into PDF files and run them through OCR and make them available. And if we get a letter, we answer, and we respectfully decline to remove the materials. Now that may mean someday when I come back to India, someone's going to decide they're not happy with what I did. But what we're trying to establish is the idea that works of the Indian government should be available in India freely. So I don't care if they have copyright, as long as they have a Creative Commons license or some other way. And then this idea that you can only view it on my portal is just wrong, because when you only have one copy of something, it goes away. It eventually your server fails, and that, Library of Alexandria burnt to the ground, and, so much was lost. The Digital Library of India, that India and government spent a decade scanning these books, and then their server went down, and I ended up with one of 2 copies of the Digital Library of India. Someone else in Auroraville made a copy as well. But it went away. And I think knowledge.
Did you ever go to the Gandhi Book Center in Bombay to buy stuff?
No, I haven't. That's interesting.
Peter, this might be a nice way to sort of term, because the Gandhi Book Center in Auroville is a Gandhi Book Center in Bombay. This is near Grant Road Station. It's one of the really old public Gandhi institutions. Actually, for me, brings together the Gandhi printed works and food in a very nice way, because it's a great bookshop. I mean, it's a great bookshop for Gandhi and stuff. I bought all my copies of the Pyarelal biography of Gandhi, which is very long and all over the place, but has fascinating details which are not captured by anywhere else. This is the biography of Gandhi that Pyarelal and his sister Sushila Nair did of Gandhi. It's about 9 volumes or something like that. It's right near Grant Road Station. But the thing about it is they also sell Gandhian products, in particular very good quality oil, because cooking oil, because among the many things that Gandhi was interested in, he was interested in traditional pressed oil, ghani, what we call the traditional ghani, cold pressed oil. And there is a center in Panvel, which is not very far from you, is it?
Not very far, no.
Huh?
Not very far from me.
Yeah, so in Panvel, there is a center started by a Gandhian called Yusuf Meher, the Yusuf Meher Center,
yes, yes.
Which runs traditional ghanis, which produce very good quality sesame and coconut and I think groundnut oil, and it's sold in the bookshop. So I mean, this is the only bookshop I know where you can go and buy really good quality cold pressed oil. When I was living in Bombay, I would buy my sesame oil in particular from the bookshop. It was great. You could go and buy books and buy your edible oil at the same thing, which to me was actually a wonderfully link between both sides of Gandhi. Oh wow, Carl has put the full Pyarelal biography of Gandhi online, and that's fantastic. So yeah, if anybody's in Bombay and you want to really good quality edible oil, go to the Gandhi bookshop.
So yes, I'm mindful that Doc reluctantly stayed the full 2 hours. He would, it's hard to get Doc to commit.
Thank you very much, Carl, for joining us. It's really added to this wonderfully, and I'm really happy to get to meet you this way. And as I said, to thank you again personally for all the amazing work that you've done.
Very nice to meet you. I thoroughly enjoyed hearing you talk. It's amazing what you've done here, reading that much material.
Any last questions or any such thing, quick ones, before we let Doc go back to, I'm assuming, dinner, unless you've eaten earlier?
Sleep. Hello, this is way past my bedtime.
Ah, yes, that too. But you don't have to go dog walking tomorrow morning. So that's why I let it go a little beyond 10.
When you have been woken up by dogs at 5 in the morning, it's in your blood.
All right. So I don't think there's any more questions. So Doc, thanks so much. Thanks so much for staying and for,
Thank you.
Fascinating.
Okay, bye.
Okay, see you guys. And thank you everyone for coming.